can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Check out past episodes. When I was doing a lot of research for this, Garry, I was thinking, what other past episodes are interesting related? And I interviewed Tom Kalinske, who is CEO of Mattel, Sega, and Leapfrog. And he talked about how he managed being a CEO of large companies while having 6 children. And so I don't even know how he did that, honestly, but he's helped build some of the best known brands for kids, including Hot Wheels, Masters of the Universe, Matchbox, Sega, Sonic the Hedgehog. So check that out. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. I co-founded with my business partner, John Corcoran. We help B2B businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 partnerships, clients, and help you run your podcast. So the number one thing, Garry, I've done in my life is focus on relationships. And I'm always looking how to give to my best relationships. The podcast has allowed me to profile other thought leadership in companies and give to them and spread their message out to the universe. So we help businesses launch and run their podcast. Check out rise25.com. If you watch the video on the homepage, John and I banter like an old married couple. So you'll see our personalities come out and check that out. I am excited to talk about today's guest. And Garry Ridge is CEO of WD-40, and there's 2 people that inspired this interview, Garry. Nick Aracco of Achieve Next. We're talking about leaders, servant leaders, and your name came up and your company came up. And then I had another interview with AC Evans, founder of Drips.com. And after we had that conversation, Garry, I got the book, Helping People Win at Work. And AC, we were just chatting before the interview, and AC's like, that's one of my favorite books. I love that book. And so I'm like, we have to have Garry on. So chairman and CEO of WD-40, Garry Ridge. He's passionate about empowering organizational culture that's established at the WD-40 company. He joined WD-40 in 1987. He's worked directly with the company in over 50 countries. In 1997, he was appointed the president and CEO. And, if you don't know WD-40, first of all, Garry, I think everyone has a can of WD-40 in their house or their office, I imagine. If you haven't heard of them, they're the maker of WD-40. And they also have other products, Lava, heavy-duty hand cleaners, Carpet Fresh, Spot Shot, and many more. And you need to go to their website and check out the story. It was in 1953. It was developed in a small lab that was actually a rocket chemical company. And it took 40 attempts. So as an entrepreneur, business leader, they didn't stop. They were probably, if it took 50, it took 100 to be called WD-172, but it took 40 attempts until they got it. So that's where the name comes from. He's also Adjunct Professor at University of San Diego, and he co-authored, everyone should check out the book on Audible or Amazon or, wherever. He co-authored the book with Ken Blanchard, outlining his effective leadership techniques. It's titled Helping People Win at Work, a business philosophy called Don't Mark My Paper, Help Me Get an A. Garry, thanks for joining me.
Hey, g'day, Jeremy. That was a long introduction.
I know, it's much deserved. You know what I mean? So,
I prefer to introduce myself as the consciously incompetent, probably wrong and roughly right CEO of WD-40.
You're a modest guy. So I want to start pre-1987. Just talk a little bit about your journey up to WD-40, and then we can jump into some of the leadership principles.
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm an Aussie. I grew up in a small suburb of Sydney called Five Dock. I was the youngest of 4 kids. My next brother was about 13 years away from me, and I was always inquisitive about learning. I left school at 16. I joined a retail organization. I joined their management development program. I graduated with a management degree, well, not a degree, a certificate in retail wholesale distribution. I then went into sales and marketing, and eventually got connected with WD-40 prior to 1987. And in 87, they asked me to join them. And my dad was an engineer, and I remember clearly saying to him, "Hey, Dad, I've been asked to join WD-40 company," and he, quote unquote, he said, "You can't go wrong with that stuff, son." And he was right.
You know, I think early on you did some door-to-door sales.
I was a paper boy, actually. I used to deliver newspapers. One of the people I used to deliver to was a lady called Mrs. Peel. I worked in a hardware store, a sporting goods store, in a dry cleaner. I had a little car wash business with a friend of mine called Ridge and Rob Car Wash. So, I was really intrigued with business from the early stages. But I think more importantly, I loved the connection with and the relationships and the connection with people. People are very intriguing.
In 1987, you joined WD-40. What were you thinking, I want to be CEO someday? What was your thought process when you entered in the company?
No, I never thought that at all. I thought two things. My dad, he worked for the same company for 50 years, from when he was 15 to when he was 65. And Dad always said, a fair day's work for a fair day's pay. So I wanted to give a fair day's work. And I've always had the belief that, get in the team and play your best game, and there's a chance you would be maybe picked on the A team one day. So I never joined WD-40 with any ambition to be the CEO. In fact, that was probably the last thing on my mind.
So talk about some of the positions and what you did leading up to CEO.
Yeah, well, I had the privilege of opening our Australian subsidiary. So on July 4th, 1987, I joined the company. I think they had a holiday here in the US that day. And I opened the company with a fax machine under my bed. That's where it all started. And for 6 months, I got the opportunity to start a corporation from basically ground zero, pulling it up from the bootstraps, if you will. So we set up the corporation, we found office space, I employed people, and on January 1, 1988, we opened WD-40 Company Australia. And from 88 through to 1994, actually, I spent most of my time in Asia. One of the reasons WD-40 wanted to open a subsidiary is back then they were starting to get really curious and serious about how they could take the WD-40 brand to the world. Back then, the majority of the sales of WD-40 were in the United States, but the leadership back then had the foresight to believe and that there were a lot of squeaks around the world, and maybe they could do that.
Yeah.
So I started to work in Asia. I probably took the first can of WD-40 into China back in in the 80s. And in 1994 or thereabouts, I was having a conversation with my then boss, who eventually was the president of the company. And I said, "Is there anything else you'd like me to do? I could do some more work." And he said, "Would you like to move to the United States?" And I said, "To do what?" And he said, "Well, I think you're pretty passionate about global business. You want to take our brand to the world. You've been curious enough and tried a lot of things. Why don't you come here and help us take the brand to the world?" And I thought, well, why not? So we packed up our toys and moved to San Diego.
Wow.
And from 94 to 97, I really spent a lot of time in Europe and in Latin America. We had a subsidiary in Europe at that time, and we needed to get that more focused on what we believed the success factors were. So we did that. And then in 1997, the then President Garry retired. And for some reason, I guess the board of directors felt that a guy who'd never been to Wall Street might be a good person to lead a US public company. And that's where I really, really learned that I was consciously incompetent. And the journey started. I really, worked out a couple of things. Micromanagement wasn't scalable. We were about a little less than a quarter of the size in revenue than we are now. 80 to 90% of our business was in the US. And if we were going to set up this organization to be globally successful, I had to become a better leader. So I went back to school, and I went back to the University of San Diego. That's where I met my dear friend now, Ken Blanchard. As you mentioned, we wrote a book together. He was my professor.
Oh, wow.
And we and I did a master's degree in leadership. And my objective was to confirm what I thought I knew and learn what I didn't know. And that's where I started to learn the power of empowering people. And what became real clear to me is that, I was probably wrong and roughly right about most things. And the three most important words that I've ever learned in my life became really meaningful. And those three words were, I don't know. And that's where we started. I'm just so grateful. It's been a wonderful journey so far.
So how did the book come about? Helping people win at work. How did that discussion lead to book with Ken Blanchard?
Well,
and you even check those other books. I mean, he sold like 20 million books. The 1 Minute Manager. He has so many other books. How did that come about?
Well, Ken was my professor in class, and he was telling a story about how when he was a professor at university, he used to give out the final paper at the beginning of the class. And he got into all sorts of trouble from the administration about, hey, Blanchard, what are you doing about giving out the final paper? He says, not only am I going to give the final paper out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to help them learn the answers. And I went, duh. That one of the biggest problems we have in corporations is there is not a clear understanding of what the expectation of an A looks like. So if we're able to describe what an A is, and then if the leader's job or the coach's job was not to mark their paper, but to help them get an A, then we may have something that's really, really powerful. So that was really the basis of the book around, how do we set up a system within an organization where the leader's job is absolutely focused on helping those they lead step into the best version of their personal self on a daily basis. So that's how the book came together.
So there's 12 simple truths in the book. One of my favorites is servant leadership is the only way to go. Talk about that for a second.
Well, one of my other mates is Simon Sinek. And Simon says, leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of the people in your charge. And I absolutely believe that it is just deplorable that 70% of people who go to work every day are either disengaged or actively disengaged. And I wrote an article called Al, the Soul-Sucking CEO. And I talk about the attributes of Al. And it's these attributes that are actually anti-servant leadership that create this type of toxic environment, and where they don't love up their people. They're adding too much value. They always have to be right. One of them that I really think is sad is where ego eats empathy instead of empathy eating ego. So if you think about all of the elements of servant leadership, it's about you serving your people to help them be the best they possibly can be. And it's ego and, this hierarchical, I'm the king of the hill because I'm the CEO type of toxic environment that creates these cultures that are not creating great outcomes. I have an algorithm for culture, and culture equals values plus behavior times consistency. So in an organization, our role to create culture is make sure we've got a clearly defined set of values. We're brave enough and love our people enough to recognize good behavior and redirect behavior that needs to be redirected. And we have to do it consistently, day after day after day after day.
Yeah. I mean, I was listening to one of your talks, Garry, and you said ego, when ego is more dominant than empathy, there's huge, huge problems. What do you suggest people, as far as, everything needs to be practiced and we need to continuously, stress that muscle. If someone feels like, well, how do I have more empathy? How can they start? What resources should they look at, or what things should they do on a daily basis to think about that more or actually practice it?
Well, firstly, they have to be committed to the fact that it is all about the other people. It's not about them. The word ego means self. Empathy means others. So stop thinking about yourself and start thinking about others. In fact, there's a wonderful process that Marshall Goldsmith uses that's called the Life Plan Review, where you have 6 questions and you ask yourself at least 6 questions every day. And they're active questions, not passive questions, like I did my best to. So one of them, you may get into this process, is I did my best to show empathy today. I did my best to, be thankful today. I did my best to whatever today. But it's just repetitive. When I finished my MSCL program, which is the master's degree I had, I, for a number of weeks, months, had written on the palm of my hand, recognize and praise. I used to write it on my hand every day because I had to remind myself that, I had to be mindful, and being mindful is hard because we forget, right?
Yeah.
So, it's about discipline, but it's really about here. If your heart really is about helping people be better today, then you'll get it. But if your heart isn't in it, you'll never get it.
Yeah. So step 1, write on your hand, recognize and praise.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. Who are some leaders you respect out there?
Well, I think there's a number of people, Charles Schultz from Starbucks, certainly a giver, not a taker, when you look at what they've done. Leaders across different aspects of life, either academically, Marshall Goldsmith, Simon Sinek, who are doing their bit to tell people about leadership. Bob Chapman, who is an unbelievable servant leader. He's the CEO of Barry Weinmiller. He says you have heart counts, not head counts in an organization, which I really love. I think that's really strong.
You mentioned employee engagement. I'm wondering, what are some of the things you do to infuse values in the whole organization and, improve employee engagement?
Well, firstly, you have to have a clearly defined set of values. Then you have to have a description of what those values mean, and the values need to be hierarchical. And what we talk about in the book is our values are actually embedded as part of our communication process between the coach and our tribe member. We don't call people in our organization managers, they're coaches. And we are not employees, we're tribe members. One of the biggest desires we have as human beings is to belong. If you think of Maslow's hierarchy to self-actualization, the first 2 steps are survival and security. The third one is belonging. And we don't create belonging in organizations because of these toxic environments. So in our development program, in our ongoing feedback program we talk about in the book, we actually have our tribe members discuss with their coach how they have lived our values in the last 90 days. And we only have 2 measurements of values. You either live them or you visit them. And we don't like a lot of visitors. So the way that you embed values is you describe the behaviors, you have conversation around the behaviors and the outcomes of those behaviors, you reward, applaud, and cheer on the people who live the values, and you help to redirect those that don't. So remember I said culture equals values plus behaviors times consistency. It's the consistency around them that's important. And leadership has to walk the talk all the time. Our number 1 value is we value doing the right thing. Our number 2 value is we value creating positive, lasting memories in all of our relationships. And I'll give you an example of how you can put values into action. And I'll reference our number 2 value on this. I was in a meeting some time ago at our teepee. We call our offices our teepee, although I haven't been there for, I think, 15 weeks. We've been remote for that period of time, which has been a wonderful learning experience. Anyhow, I was in a meeting and there was a leader in the meeting who was actually having, obviously, a bad day. That leader was kind of pumping out these emotional toxins that were terrible. And of course, that was permeating those that were in the room. And as those people probably left the room, they probably took that with them. So because our second value is we value creating positive, lasting memories, that gave me the permission to be able to open a conversation around the behavior. So when the meeting was over, I said to this person, let's call him Joe or Fred, let's go for a walk in the parking lot. So we walked out into our parking lot, and I'm looking behind a car, and I'm looking in a trash can, and I'm looking in the area where the big air conditioning unit is, and I can see this person kind of really getting a little agitated, and they said, what the hell are you doing? I said, I'm looking for you. What do you mean you're looking for me? The you that I know and love was not in that room this morning. You were not creating positive, lasting memories. What's on your mind? Can we talk? And the person started to share that they'd actually had a pretty uncomfortable morning. They got up, kicked their foot on the bed, spilled some coffee. Someone flicked them off on the way to work. There were a number of instances that had put them in a really bad frame of mind. So we talked it through, and we came to the conclusion that in this coaching session that he had or she had no right to bring that into our environment because it violated one of our values. And at the end of the meeting, this was pre-COVID, obviously, we kind of hugged and she said, thank you. And he or she went off then, and I noticed that he was going around visiting the people that were in the meeting, kind of apologizing and setting the scene. Now, interesting enough, Jeremy, the next morning I observed something really interesting again. The people who were in that meeting were actually seeking this person out, just checking on them to see if they were okay today. Isn't that wonderful?
That's cool.
Isn't that just such a wonderful thing? So that's how you make a value come to life, and how it creates through our behaviors and interactions the type of cultures we want.
Thanks for sharing that story. Yeah. I mean, it's oftentimes that happens and then it just goes unsaid and then things fester internally, so, addressing it head on. I'm curious, Garry, as far as employee, the hiring process is important. It kind of goes in the foundation of bringing on the right people. Some of the things you do in the hiring process that are important, and then the onboarding process itself. What are some things people should consider in the hiring process to make sure you have the right people there that have the right attitude that are going to embody that?
I think firstly, you have to be very, very clear around what it is that's important to you in the organization. And if you were if you were to go onto our website and go to our careers page, the first thing that pops up is, these are our values. And it basically says, if you don't align with these values, don't call us. So don't advertise for what you're looking for. Now, when we start the process, we actually employ for values, number one, and competency, number two, which is really important to us. And then, you will go through a number of, interviews, interactions with our tribe members as you go through the process of being selected or not. Interestingly enough, we have our director of first impressions, the person that's on our front desk. We ask them, how were they treated when someone comes for an interview? The onboarding, by the time they get to be in the company, the onboarding process is pretty amazing in that it would not be unusual for someone who has been announced to become a tribe member to get hundreds of emails from people all around the world welcoming them to the tribe. So immediately it's welcome. And then they go through they have a coach, a mentor, a buddy that they rely on as we go through the process. So, I think it's before they enter the door is really important, and really being very, very, very clear on what it is that you're looking for to join the organization.
Is that mentor there to go over anything specific, or are they just there as a support to the company for that person?
No, there is a support. Of course, their direct coach is the one that's absolutely responsible for bringing them into the organization. But, we have a number of development programs. One is called Leadership Lab 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. And in Leadership Lab, that's a program that everybody in the company can go through. And particularly as people come on, we encourage them to enroll and go through this overall development process that we do, where we actually teach leadership. We teach the value of personal interactions, conflict resolution, all of the things that get in the way of building great relationships.
Talk a little about managing remote teams now that we've kind of shifted to virtual. What have you seen maybe is working better now that we're in virtual environment, and what are some challenges with the virtual environment?
What I think is working better is what I call the Brady Bunch meeting.
Okay.
And if you think about it, how many Brady Bunch meetings have we all been in recently where there's a whole bunch of little squares on our screen? And what became very clear to me is no square is bigger than any other square. So it's an equalizer. I've noticed that virtually we're coming together, we're on time, we're probably better organized with our agendas. There's not an opportunity for anyone to really command the meeting if they're not entitled to, because you do have a mute button. So I think it's been really interesting. Something that became very clear to me at the early parts of this adventure of COVID was, in times of great and real need, we can pivot around fear. And what do I mean by that? We had all of this technology in our company. We had Zoom, we had WebEx, but people were afraid. And come around March 7th or 8th, they had to pivot around that fear, because if they didn't get comfortable with it, nothing was going to work. And, what couple of things we shared was, forgive everyone for being human and forgive yourself for making mistakes, because it would not be unusual on this podcast for my dog to bark in a minute. I was on something the other day, and the guy was sitting in his little office, and we were having an interview similar to this. The door behind him opened. His daughter walked in. She had all curly hair. She went and got some paper off the printer and kissed her dad on the cheek and walked out. And it's like, that's what happens these days.
Yeah.
So I think we've got, but again, Jeremy, we're social animals. So we do miss each other, and I'm looking forward to the point. But I think what will happen when we get back to the office environment, we will be overall better communicators, because in the times when we're not personally together, we will be better at communicating using the types of tools that you and I are using right now.
I want to go to the, going global, WD-40 going global. So what do you, so you want to expand into Europe and other countries. So you show up in Europe. I'm just so curious, what do you do at that point? We want to go and expand into Europe. What is some of the strategies you're thinking about when you're expanding into other countries?
Thank you. Some simple questions. The first question we need to look at is, do you need me? Do you need me as a brand? And I'll give you an example. It wasn't Europe, it was China. When I first took WD-40 into China to look at that market, I asked the question, do you need me? And I didn't necessarily ask any people individually. I asked the market, observing, do you need me? And the answer was, no, I don't need you, because the problems that you solve are currently being solved by dirty diesel oil, ignorance, and a hammer. And I am being the end user or the market, am satisfied with that solution. So the first question you ask is, do you need me? And if the answer is no, you come back later and ask it again. The second question is, if the answer is yes, then the next question is, can I have you know me? So how can I, is there a business case for me to make the end user aware of our product? And then finally, is there a business case where I can make it easy for them to buy the product? So if you get positive answers on all of those, you now have an opportunity to create a business unit to make all those things happen. And then you get into the hiring, the developing, or whatever. But, our job, we're in the memories business. If you ask, you said everybody has a can of WD-40. Thank God, no, they don't. There's lots of squeaks in China and lots of rust in Russia, and we're still the boys and girls to solve those things. However, we've got to make sure that we have got a business case that we can develop. We're in the memories business. So if you look at our just cause is to make life better at home and at work. Our why is we create positive, lasting memories, solving problems in factories, homes, and workshops of the world. Problem solved, job done right. That's what we do. So, people ask me, what do? I say, I create memories with our brands. It's much more purpose-driven than saying, I stop squeaks or I sell oil in a can. Selling oil in a can is pretty boring. Creating positive, lasting memories is pretty exciting.
Yeah. Garry, what is one story that sticks out, like a customer story of someone using the product that sticks out as a memory? Maybe it's been told down from, the decades from someone using WD-40. What's a favorite WD-40 story that lingers amongst the culture of, you always talk about this story?
There's quite a lot. I'll give you one.
Yeah.
There was a lady in the Midwest of the US who loved to feed birds. She had a bird feeder out in her backyard. It was a kind of a dish on a pole. And the squirrels used to climb up the pole and eat the bird feed. So she wasn't getting the joy of feeding the birds. So what did she do? She sprayed WD-40 on the pole. What did that mean? It was reasonably difficult now for the squirrel to get up the pole. Yeah. What's the memory? The memory is she now has the joy of feeding the bird. Look at all the memories that have been created with dads and sons, dads and daughters doing stuff. I've got wonderful pictures. My grandson sent me a picture the other day, and here he is out in his backyard with his bike up like this. He's 8 years old, and he's got a can of WD-40, and it's like, hey, Pop, thanks for the can. I'm you preparing my bike. Well, I'll never forget that. Life is about memories. At the end of the day, it all goes back in the box. It's the memories that are so important.
To me, the memory that sticks out is, seeing the birds is cool, but I want to see the video of the squirrels trying to get up the pole and then slipping down. I want to see that video. Garry, what's the toughest part about your job? You have so much to manage, so much to keep track of. What's the tough part about what you do?
I've never looked at it being tough. If I looked at it as being a job, it might be tough, but this is not a job. I don't have a job. I have a purpose, and I have a why statement. I wake up every morning to help people create positive, lasting memories. The most exciting part of that is finding all the new and different ways to do that. So, sure, there are things in the work that I would prefer to do less of, and things in the work that I would prefer to do more of. But this is not a job. I have a purpose, and I keep saying, imagine a place where you go to work every day, you make a contribution to something bigger than yourself, you learn something new, you're protected and you're set free by a compelling set of values, and you go home happy. Happy people create happy families. Happy families create happy communities. Happy communities create a happy world. We need a happy world. And we as leaders of organizations have the biggest opportunity ever to make a positive impact on people. But we let them down by not doing that, because the ego eats the empathy instead of the empathy eating the ego. And it's all about me. And it's all about, short term instead of the infinite game. Everybody wants to play the finite game. Wall Street tells you, what are you going to do for me tomorrow? It's not about what we're going to do tomorrow. It's about building an enduring company over time. There's so much working against us, but, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile work.
I want to read your next book. I don't know what it's going to be called, but I know the subhead. It's like When Ego Eats Empathy or something like that. So I hope you have...
called Al, the soul-sucking CEO.
Yeah, exactly.
He actually exists.
Okay. I have two last questions, Garry. I just want to, first of all, thank you. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge, your leadership principles, so we can all learn from them. Everyone should check out Helping People Win at Work. You can find it on Amazon, Audible, and check out WD40company.com and some of their values. And there's a great video talking about their values, doing the right thing on one of the pages. I always ask, Garry, since it's Inspired Insider, what's been a low moment or a challenge point, in your career and how you push through? And then on the flip side, what's been a proud moment for you?
I think both of them are the same. A low moment for me is when I see people who truly have the potential to be great don't see it in themselves. And a high moment is when I see people who have the potential to be great and they do see it in themselves. And I think our job as leaders is to work on both of those. You know, a wonderful story that I'll share with you. As I said, we have an operation in mainland China. We opened a subsidiary there 14 years ago. Our first national employee, Chinese employee there, a lady by the name of Grace, she joined us as our office manager, if you will. She, from there, had an interest in human resources. As we started to grow, she went into human resources. She then had a passion for supply chain. We sponsored her and helped her go through a master's degree in supply chain management. Fast forward, about 2 years ago, Grace was appointed our country manager of China, one of our biggest opportunities in the world. There you go. Our first employee 14 years ago, now the leader of the China operation. And that gives me goosebumps. I mean, that truly gives me goosebumps.
Garry, I want to be the first one to thank you. Everyone check out the book, check out WD40company.com. Any other places we should point people towards to learn more?
Yeah, I have a website, www.thelearningmoment.net, because, you know, as I've often said, we don't make mistakes, we have learning moments. And then and I also publish articles from time to time on LinkedIn, so I'm also there.
Thelearningmoment.net. Check it out. Garry, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I feel like 100 grand.